Good morning, my friends, wherever you may be in the world today. July 17th, 2021, here from the island of Maui in Hawaii, United States of America. Thank you for joining my live stream and podcast as I see it. Today's talk, continuing my support for the country of Burma, Myanmar, the freedom fighters, the revolutionaries, the political prisoners, those who have died, those who've been killed in honor of these radical men and women fighting for freedom and democracy, the right to live in unity and peace with a dream to believe in the sanctity of life. We stand, I encourage you to encourage your friends to stand in solidarity with the beloved freedom fighters of Myanmar. Today's talk four efforts, and I found this in my notes from my time with Aung Suu Kyi, four efforts, advice that she explained was given to her by her and our own late Dhamma teacher, meditation teacher, the Venerable Sayadaw U Pandita from Pandita Rama and formerly from the Mahasi Thatanayekta, both of these reputable meditation centers in the city of Yangon in Burma. Many of you know that my preceptor, the Venerable Mahasi Sayadaw, and then my teacher as well, and then when he passed away in August of 1982, I then became under the tutelage of the successor to the Mahasi tradition, the Venerable Sayadaw U Pandita. And he and I, over many decades, I am honored to say, became my beloved Kali Anamita, a Buddhist Pali word for a man or a woman with unrelenting commitment to truth-telling, non-collusion, transparency, honesty, and the power of navigating the intersubjective domain of self with other with mindful intelligence. And what a beautiful mind both Venerable Mahasi Sayadaw was and other venerable monks at the Mahasi Yekta, and more directly to this talk, the late Venerable Sayadaw U Pandita, who gave advice on numerous occasions to Aung San Suu Kyi, to U Tin U Win Tain, many hundreds of other freedom fighters, both really well known and others not so well known, but all remarkably courageous in their own ethical, spiritual, political way. Aung San Suu Kyi had told me about the many encounters that she had with Venerable Sayadaw U Pandita, both at her home at 54 University Avenue as well as the monasteries in Rangoon. And this one particularly applies to this moment in Myanmar. The four efforts, let me just state them and then we'll get into it for a few minutes here. Advice given from the late Venerable Sayadaw U Pandita to Aung San Suu Kyi, and many of you who know this, but those of you who don't, Aung San Suu Kyi is the state counselor of the country of Burma, one of the leaders of the civilian government, and she, along with the president, U Win Myint, and hundreds of others, perhaps thousands more, who are at this point incarcerated, or I should say imprisoned, and denied their rights, often tortured, and shamed for their love of freedom and democracy. At this moment, they are in unknown locations in Burma where they are being tried in an Orwellian tribunal by the terrorist at large, the former general of the army, Min Aung Hlaing, and his terrorist organization known as State Administration Council. Together, the acronym of this latest designation of a terrorist group on planet Earth is known as MAHSAC, M-A-H-S-A-C, and it should be associated with the earliest stages of Pol Pot and his Khmer Rouge in the genocide in Cambodia. In my humble estimation, tragic as it is to say, Burma is undergoing a genocide today, and I call it a genocide of democracy. Yesterday I gave a talk about this and included the phrase sedition, the Dhamma of sedition, and also the term political sanvega, the radical urgency to integrate revolutionary thought, speech, and action in support of the democratization of a country. Politics and Dhamma are inseparable. No one's an island in this world. Freedom is freedom wherever you are. And these four efforts, the four types of virya, this is a Pali Buddhist word that means determined effort, not ordinary effort. I'll just read them out. The first is to start or make a decision to begin something, to initiate something, to make a decision to start an initiation of something, the conception, that effort, that virya. Two, the second is to start implementing that vision according to the decision made, the implementation, the beginning of those actions required to put into motion that particular vision, that particular effort, that particular virya. Point three, the third is to keep on implementing. Although there are difficulties that are encountered, to continue to push on, to keep implementing the vision moment by moment, minute by minute, week by week, staying sustained despite the difficulties. Point three. Point four, to keep on implementing with unflagging zeal. Sayadaw Pandita told Aung San Suu Kyi, unflagging virya, determined effort, like courageous levels of effort, sustained, engaged, courageous, ethically rooted, heightened, principled effort. Caring, as she would say, as she told me back in '95, caring for things larger than your own self-interest. Quiver with freedom, quiver with virya, stay on course, keep on pushing despite the difficulties. Right on, right? Let me read them again, all four of them in short. The first is to make a decision to start an initiation of the vision of democracy, the second coming of freedom in Myanmar. Stay with it, stay with it. Two, start implementing according to the decision. Be smart, be frugal, be circumspect. Keep alive the timeless qualities of inquiry and questioning and reasoning, and keep on considering the weaknesses and the foibles of the so-called adversary, the dictatorship, the totalitarian, and find ways to implement efforts that go into the deep crevasses of that totalitarian psyche to possibly awaken conscience in their own repressed dignity, the nonviolent activist in action, as I hear it. Point three, the third is to keep on implementing regardless of the difficulties. There's something so rad about that. To keep on pushing, to keep on implementing. Look at the women and the men, the nuns and monks, the teachers, the nurses, the shopkeepers. Look at the people in the country of Myanmar right now, all throughout the country, everywhere, in the prison camps, in the labor camps, in their homes, often suffering with COVID-19 because the Ming Online's Masak is depriving the nation of oxygen, and doctors and nurses and clinicians shooting into these places where people are trying to survive. The crematoriums, you can't even get into a queue. They're just filled 24/7 with bodies dying from this virus, all based on a second form of genocide by Ming Online and his State Administration Council, the genocide of democracy and the Dhamma of sedition, the radicalization of creating a kind of Dhamma riot, if you will, within the country that rises up and refuses to participate in dictatorial terror. Point 4, the fourth is to keep on implementing with unflagging zeal. What a tall order. Even if the endeavor seems to be failing. That was Aung San Suu Kyi telling me the advice that the late Venerable Sayadaw Pandita gave her. Even if it seems to be failing. Now, let me just riff a little bit here if I can. I'm of the belief, of the feeling, that Burma's second struggle for independence, the struggle that you primarily are in and we on the outside are doing all that we can to support in our own humble way, that it is my belief that this revolution of the spirit, 2021, July, has already been won. That is my belief. I feel it deep inside of my conscience that the revolution that was instigated right after the liberation from the white supremacist imperialists of England back in the 1940s, and after the incredible, tumultuous, torturous, traumatic war of World War II and the hand-to-hand combat and the bombing that went down in the country of Burma within Mandalay and Malmin and Rangoon, and then the liberation of the country from the incredible tenacity of people like the young student Aung San, Aung San Suu Kyi's heroic father, and the group of his 29 colleague, friends, students that went underground to Japan and learned subversive tactics to confront the oppressors from England in their own country there. The students came back and did the unthinkable, put these 4 efforts into dynamic action. We had the emergence of democracy, and of course many of you know, many of us know, that the young Aung San was assassinated. From that, there was the emergence of democracy briefly with Prime Minister U Nu and the formation of a parliament. And then in '62, we all remember Ne Win in his ambitious, that particular state of consciousness that's rooted deep in the human psyche of radical mana mixed with moha, pride and delusion, with radical lobha, greed. It moves into a form of narcissism and toxic, torturous, violent oppression of people known as dictatorship. And he set the country back by decades, nationalizing the industries that emerged from the beginning of democracy, and slowly, in his socialist euphemism, which is another word for dictatorship, began to accumulate the wealth and the profits and the desire to dominate. And here we are almost 50-something years later, and a succession of dictators born from that particular psychology. However, from U Ottama back in 1920, to U Ithara in 29, to Mahatma Gandhi's visit to beloved Burma and his meeting with the monks at the Shwedagon, and how U Ithara and U Ottama went to prison numerous times. And let's just pause. These are two well-known former monks who died for the cause of freedom, to overcome the oppressors from England, and now the next iteration of oppression, dictatorial, militarized terrorism. It's the same psychology. Set aside doing it to their own people. Forget that. It's dictatorship. And U Ottama and U Ithara. And just think right now, pause, take a moment. How many other men and women back at that era, in that time, took these four efforts, had a vision for freedom, stayed with it and implemented it, rose up courageously to challenge the difficulties they were encountering. And then even when they thought it was failing, they continued to strike, to speak out, to deprive the military, the white supremacists, the dictatorships of the joy of feeling that they conquered the psyche and the consciousness of the other. These are radical freedom fighters that were willing to die, to be tortured. And the history of these people continues to this very day. I have not seen in my humble lifetime more radically courageous people. And I know they're all over the world, but Myanmar holds the pantheon of radical, ethical, courageous, mindfully awakened people who are willing to put it all on the line and embody these four efforts that the late Venerable Sayadaw U Pandita gave directly to Aung San Suu Kyi as the power sources of revolution for freedom and democracy in their country of Burma. We have a teaching to follow, right? Let me just reiterate these four efforts again in brief. The four viryas: determined effort, make a decision and start it. 2, implement it according to the vision, be smart. Keep on pushing on, keep on implementing, regardless of the difficulties encountered. And then 4, with unflagging zeal, even when the effort and the vision seems to be failing. Pause, get your breath, feed a neighbor, cry, rest, meditate, bathe, do what you need to do to gather the deeper cognitive, psychological, Dhamma, spiritual wisdom, effort, compassion, and keep on pushing. Burma is a country right now where these four efforts are in primarily the soul and the psyche and the conscience of the entire country. That's why I say the terrorist group Ming Online and the State Administration Council has already lost. Why? Through his evil intent. Yes, there could be a redemption moment like Devadatta or potentially Angulimala. Yes, the seeds of awakening are probably in the mind and the heart of everyone. But right now, through his own unrecognized Lobha Dosa Moha, the terrorist at large, Ming Online, has created hell, a genocide of democracy in the country of beloved Myanmar in Burma. And he's galvanized through his own evil the entire nation Never before have we seen this. The entire nation, all ethnicities, everyone, probably the large majority even of the terrorist group, the former Tamada, and the police force, terrified if they defy the orders of their superiors, but you can be sure in their conscience they want to belong to the revolution, the democracy, and the freedom. And there's only a handful of men and women at the very top who live in this very idealized, idiotic, sociopathic, privileged castle of hell, don't realize that they live in an encasement of hell. But you can be sure their minds are tormenting them at night and in day with fear. And the whole country of Myanmar, the whole world is supporting you. Know that in your hearts. They may not be acting right now in the way that we want them to act, but people are taking notice. We have won the revolution. Stay with point 4, as Sayadaw Pandita gave Aung San Suu Kyi this remarkable advice. Even if it seems that the vision of freedom is failing, it's the 4th dimension of virya. It is natural to experience in this samsara with moba, dosa, and moha, with greed, anger, delusion, encounters of struggle and difficulty. But fight you must with the power of your Dhamma, with the power of your conscience, with the power of your dignity, for the betterment of the people alive, in honor of those who have been killed and who have died for the struggle, and for the unborn. We are in revolution with 4 efforts, and I am honored to be a part, a son, a brother, an uncle, a friend of the revolution in Burma. Burma is my Dhamma home and the birthplace of my understanding of the responsibility to enact freedom in a democratic society, especially when it's being oppressed. And in Burma right now, it's a democracy that is under genocidal threat. And the whole country is empowering conscious revolutionary sedition, implementing radical awakening to confront the injustice of Ma Sac. You're done, dude. It is over. Look at how your efforts have utterly failed. The nation is in collapse in a good way. Yes, it is so epically difficult. The food supplies and medicines and COVID and the deprivation of this evil incarnation, this terrorist group depriving the nation of therapeutics and medicine and shelter and doctors and nurses and oxygen and safety and education and food and money. Dude, Ming Online, it's over, man, and the country is not going to back down. Why? Because just as the late Venerable Sayadaw Pandita gave this timeless advice to Aung San Suu Kyi, that advice lives on and is even strengthened more than ever. I'm not speaking about history. I'm just sharing information that was shared with me to share back with the people, to keep encouraging, empowering the revolution, not to give up under any circumstance, even when it feels like it's failing. Let's take into account 1988. Look at all the men and women and students, farmers and doctors, nurses and teachers and nuns and monks. Look at the revolution of freedom that rose up from the horrors of Ne Win mowing down, killing students at close range. They refused to give up. Talk about difficulty, it galvanized a whole new, younger generation. We want freedom like our brothers and sisters. 2007, the saffron, the monks and the nuns took to the streets and chanted the timeless teachings of love and compassion, and the dictatorship was threatened by love and compassion, put them down with bullets and bayonets, put them in prison, took their robes off. But guess what? The four efforts, we refuse to participate in your lies, in your denigration. We have Dhamma, we have dignity, we have conscience in our heart. That is Myanmar's revolution of the spirit. You've already won. The light is so bright that they're trying every way possible to put it out, but you cannot put it out that way. Dignity cannot be killed by a bullet. You cannot take the freedom from a human mind dedicated to the vision of love. I think about all the people that I've been blessed to meet who've spent between a year and 22 years incarcerated in the labor camps, in the prison camps, in the gulags all throughout the country of Myanmar. We've documented them. My friend Fergus Harlow, my colleague, my fellow researcher, and I spent nearly 10 years. Burma's Voices of Freedom. We're irrelevant. I keep going on. I wish someone would buy 1,000 copies and give them to leaders around the world to be studied. These are revolutionary experiences of putting everything on the line. I bring this up because Burma's culture is so radically empowered with these four efforts. Know that. You are in a revolution, although it seems to be going slow, a slow motion revolution. Some say, what? Way back in the 1920s with Otama and Uwisara with the British and then the dictators. But guess what? You've had a formidable task to overcome the horrors of occupation of a white supremacist British government, a world war, and then a succession of maniacal dictators. You are very near to success. Turn away if you must, but those who have the ear to hear and to feel and to resonate in support of the people of Burma, that revolution over there is a revolution in our own mind. It is the practice of meditation in dynamic action. We have examples over there, and your revolution is our revolution. All of these things lead me to one basic fact, and I'll close with this. It was Albert Camus, the French philosopher, who, if I'm not mistaken, won the Nobel Peace Prize in literature, I think in 1957. Among his many famous quotes and statements and books, one that stands out today that I wrote down in relationship to Sayadaw U Pandita's advice to Aung San Suu Kyi and the four efforts. This quote speaks so intimately to me about the nature of the revolutionaries in Myanmar today. And if you've not heard it, let it saturate your conscience and support you, especially in the fourth effort, to keep on implementing with unflagging zeal the vision of freedom and democracy, even if it seems to be failing. Albert Camus said, "The only way to deal with an unfree world is to become so absolutely free that your very existence is an act of rebellion." The only way to deal with an unfree world is to become so absolutely free that your very existence is an act of rebellion. In Burma today, an attempt to genocide those with democratic aspirations. Your very conscience and dignity, wherever you are in the world, people from the country of Myanmar in Melbourne, in Perth, in Sydney, in New York, in Los Angeles, in San Francisco, in Philadelphia, in Milwaukee, in Miami, in London, in Paris, in Prague, all over the world. Feel these four efforts. Feel Albert Camus' infamous statement, your very existence is an act of rebellion. Be so absolutely free. Closing here. What does absolutely free mean? An unflagging commitment to Sayadaw Pandita's fourth effort, regardless. I hear him talking to Aung, quivering with regardless, quivering with compassion and effort and patience, quivering in your own being for your love of freedom. I've seen it on the streets of Rangoon. I've been there at Aung San Suu Kyi's home. I've seen people coming out of the corner of their own fear and standing in solidarity to confront dictatorship and totalitarianism. And they quiver in conscience, in dignity. Their very heartbeat is an act of revolutionary rebellion. It's so rad. We all have examples. Can't help but think right now of my friend Aung San Suu Kyi, U Win Tain, the President U Win Myint, the thousands of others in the prisons right now. I just want to feel into that. I want to co-associate in my own heart with these heroic women and men right now who chose to act in conscience, chose to do what Albert Camus said, to make their very existence a radical act of freedom. In-breath, out-breath, freedom in revolutionary action. In-breath, out-breath, freedom in conscience in revolutionary action. In-breath, out-breath, embodied wisdom in revolutionary freedom in action. In a prison cell, deprived of food and medicines and sanitation. Boys and girls, nuns and monks, teachers, midwives, students, shopkeepers, human beings in the country of Burma right now, locked in behind iron bars, deprived of medicines and sleep and food and shelter and their families and peace. Their very act, if we need to draw strength for the fourth dimension of Sayadaw U Pandita's advice to Aung San Suu Kyi, the four efforts, even if it seems like the vision is failing, keep on implementing, pushing on more radically, and live and breathe in revolutionary freedom. In-breath, out-breath. There is no way that Burma's struggle for independence and freedom, the next dimension of Burma's revolution of the spirit, it is in dynamic, radiant victory. Ming Online, the terrorist at large, is terrified, thus the deep need to keep violating the people. He feels so radically unsafe because of the people's commitment to the four efforts brought forth by the late Venerable Sayadaw Pandita told to Da Aung San Suu Kyi. And I can hear Da Aung San Suu Kyi talking to the people of her country from that undisclosed location somewhere in a gulag in Naypyidaw. And all the other men and women are also chanting the four efforts. Have a vision of democracy, put it into practice, even if there's difficulties, to rise up, and even if it feels like it's failing, blow the roof off fear and to continue to act with radical, spiritual, ethical courage for the betterment of you and your family, those who've been killed, other fellow sister political prisoners, and those yet born into the beloved country of Burma. There will come a time soon when democracy will shine so brightly. The world will look to Burma, will look to this period of time and go, wow, we have an example of courage and grace under unremitting suffering and pressure. We have a vision of democracy that was won through the hard-earned efforts of the boys and girls, the men and women who refused to cower in fear and to stood up and confronted evil, terrorism. And they won through acts of conscience. And let us close here with Albert Camus' infamous statement, the mantra to us all: the only way to deal with an unfree world, wherever we are in the world, is to become so absolutely free. Feel it in your blood. Feel it in your heart, Alan. The way you walk, the way you think, the way you listen, the way you dress, the way you shower, the way you brush your teeth, the way you interact with men and women all throughout your day, Alan. Take nothing for granted. Bring the best of yourself there. Bring an absolutely liberated heart and mind to the forefront of your presence. Burma, you've given us an example today of what it means to put it all on the line. Political prisoners all throughout the country. Burma is a land of 54 million prisoners of conscience who refuse to participate or stand aside in this genocide of democracy by Ming Online and his State Administration Council. It's the ultimate confrontation of good and evil. In an unfree world, become so absolutely free that your very existence, I want to leave with that, our very existence is an act of rebellion. May I invite you to invite me, to invite all of our friends. What are 3 points that you feel would be an expression of your life being made into an exquisite expression of rebellion? A refusal to participate in lies, in distortions, in pornography, in propaganda, in complicity. Overcome self-doubt, self-denigration. Blow the lid off of fear, and let's empower the most radical expressions of liberated rebellion. Burma has ignited a fire in the heart of every human being who cares about freedom of thought, speech, and action right now. Global totalitarianism, we see you and we refuse to participate in your march. The revolution in Burma has gone global. Everywhere, all boys and girls are rising up and committing themselves to be absolutely free in dignity and conscience, and making our very existence a creative, cool, liberated, rad act of revolutionary rebellion. I love it. Put those 3 things down on your page. Make them so joyful. They're the oxygen of what empowers you and me into a delightful life, that even when we die, we know that we belonged to the long march and struggle for freedom on our precious planet. Thank you, Burma. Thank you to Aung San Suu Kyi. Thank you, political prisoners. Thank you to all those who've been died or been killed or tortured. All of you going from home to home, keeping the revolution alive in Burma. We are with you. We stand with you. We will win. From my heart to yours, thank you.